My name is Neil Carson. I had been with the company for 14 years. Long enough to know the creaks of the office chairs, the quirks in the reporting software, and the subtle ways our business kept itself afloat in down quarters. I wasn't flashy, I wasn't loud, but I got things done, and I had earned the quiet trust of clients who didn't like trusting anyone. That took time, and I'd invested all of it there. I wasn't surprised when I heard they were bringing in someone new. The board had been restless for months. Too many whispers about growth, too many meetings with consultants who used phrases like disruption architecture and operational reset. Still, I didn't expect this. Not like this. He arrived that morning in a slate gray suit that hadn't seen a wrinkle. His shoes clicked too loud on the hallway tiles, like he needed people to know he was coming. I'd seen his type before, MBA, corporate shuffle, always talking about people as resources. But I kept my thoughts to myself. I figured he'd take his time, ask questions, observe the landscape first. Instead, he scheduled 5 terminations before lunch. Mine was one of them. New vision, he said, streamlining to a future-facing structure. I remember looking at him, just looking. He didn't flinch. Maybe he thought that made him strong. But what he didn't understand was that the real strength in business is in listening, in seeing, in realizing the difference between noise and substance. I was neither surprised nor angry, but I was curious how someone could walk in, not even knowing who kept the contracts alive last quarter, and start swinging the axe like he was trimming a hedge. What he didn't know was how deep the roots ran. See, I had built quiet bridges, not loud ones. I didn't parade wins around, but I made sure people had what they needed. And over the years, I had become the silent thread that tied 3 major clients to the firm. Not because I promised miracles, but because I delivered when it mattered. Those clients weren't loyal to the logo on the door. They were loyal to the results and the person behind them. And now that person had just been fired. He didn't ask me about transition plans. He didn't request any handover. He simply assumed I was replaceable. That someone with a sharp haircut and a strong handshake could just slot into the relationships I had built over years. That's not how trust works, and it's certainly not how this business survives. So I left without complaint, packed my things, no fanfare. Just nods from a few coworkers who knew better than to ask questions. They looked worried. I think they knew the cost of what had just happened, even if he didn't. By the next morning, my inbox had already started filling up. The first email was from a procurement head at a long-standing client. She had seen the change announcement and asked if it was true I was gone. I confirmed politely. Her reply was short but clear. "We'll need to talk." By noon, a second client reached out, then a third, all expressing concern about the transition. None of them mentioned the new guy, not once. He didn't know that while he was sitting in a glass-walled office trying to realign things on a whiteboard, the real conversations were happening off-grid. Quietly, deliberately. I didn't try to pull anyone away. I didn't have to. People go where they're understood, where their needs are met. And I had spent over a decade learning how to do that without noise or ego. It wasn't about revenge. It was about principle. If someone believes you don't belong, you don't argue, you prove it, by being where you're valued. And when that value becomes obvious to everyone else, the silence speaks louder than any confrontation ever could. 2 weeks passed. I stayed quiet, worked on paperwork, cleared my accounts, made sure every project I had touched was noted and documented. That's just how I operate, clean lines, no mess. Then I got a call. A former colleague, someone still on the inside. She didn't sound like herself, her voice tight, measured. "He's asking about the client files," she said. "He doesn't know where anything is." I almost laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was inevitable. He thought he could just step into a structure without understanding what held it up. And now, pieces were shifting. He hadn't just fired an employee. He'd pulled a thread, and the pattern was unraveling faster than he could reweave it. I didn't say much on that call, just listened. Let her talk. Apparently, he'd spent the last 3 days trying to map out operational dependencies. His words, not mine. He was shocked, apparently, to find out how few people actually had the answers he was looking for. He had assumed everything was in the shared drive. He didn't realize that some things, relationships, timelines, workarounds, don't live in spreadsheets. That was his mistake. He thought control came from data access. But in this line of work, control comes from context, and he had none. Meanwhile, my phone kept buzzing. One of the clients wanted to know if I was consulting yet. I hadn't thought that far ahead. I hadn't needed to. But when someone says they're prepared to move their account if I'm available, you start thinking quickly. I said I'd circle back in a few days. I wasn't angry at the company. I'd been there too long to waste energy on bitterness. What I felt was more like disappointment, not just in the decision, but in the sheer carelessness of it. You don't walk into a system you don't understand and start pulling wires just because they look outdated. Some of them are holding up the ceiling, and now little fractures were starting to show. The team I used to work with, smart, capable people, had started to feel the pressure. Without context, they were being told to revamp workflows they didn't design. Initiatives were stalling. Deadlines were quietly slipping. And that's when the real cost started to show up. I got another call. This time, it was from a senior partner at one of the client firms. He didn't waste time. "Neil," he said, "I don't trust that guy." I didn't ask who he meant, I knew. He's got the buzzwords, the graphs, but he's missing something. You know what we expect, you know how we operate, and frankly, you're the reason we didn't jump ship during last year's crisis. So, I'll be blunt. Are you available for advisory work? I didn't answer right away. Part of me still had one foot in that office, even if it was just mentally. I hadn't let go yet. But that call? That was the line being drawn. That's when I realized that my role wasn't gone. It had just outgrown the company. I said yes, short term, just to help them stabilize. Nothing flashy, just results. Over the next few weeks, I met with 3 other clients. All of them said versions of the same thing. "We stayed because of you. We trusted the company because you were there. We're not sure who's in charge now, or if they even understand what we need." It wasn't about me being special. It was about me being consistent. That's what people value, especially in an industry built on shifting priorities. They don't care about slogans. They care about not having to explain themselves twice. Back inside the company, things weren't getting better. I wasn't watching closely. I had work to do now, but I heard things. Quiet exits, projects delayed. Teams restructured into dysfunction. He was still holding his weekly meetings, still presenting charts, still talking about strategic pivots. But none of that was solving the real problem. Clients don't care about your pivot. They care about delivery, and delivery requires continuity. Then, about a month after my firing, I got an email from a colleague who'd just resigned. It was short. "He's trying to reverse engineer what you built. He's asking for client summaries, project histories. He wants to know how you kept everything running without needing 5 meetings." That made me pause, because I never made it look difficult. That was the point. The systems I built didn't need to be seen, they just needed to work. He wanted blueprints, but he never understood the foundation. The next week, the first client pulled out. Quietly, no public drama, just a closed contract and a redirection of services through me. Then another followed. I wasn't trying to poach anyone, that's not my style. But when people call you and say they'd rather deal with someone who gets it, someone who's already earned their trust, you don't walk away from that. You answer. He, on the other hand, didn't know how to react. I'm told he held an emergency town hall, talked about temporary turbulence, tried to motivate people with a whiteboard session on long-term goals. But you can't talk people into ignoring reality. They were watching real results walk out the door, and I wasn't the only one they missed. Eventually, someone on the board reached out. Not officially, just a quiet message through a mutual contact, asking if I was open to a conversation. They didn't say why, but I could guess. And I wasn't interested, not in a return, not in fixing what someone else had broken through arrogance and inexperience. But I did offer one line. I built something solid. He tore it out before he even understood what it was. That was the last I heard from them. By now, I'd taken on 4 of the firm's former clients, all under consulting agreements. I worked from a small office, no signage, no need for titles. I kept things focused, deliberate, and honest, just like I always had. And one morning, I got a message forwarded from a contact who still had access to the internal chatter at the firm. Apparently, the board was reviewing strategic decisions made under new leadership, which is corporate speak for we might have screwed this up. The part that struck me was the sentence that followed. The erosion of client trust appears to have accelerated following key personnel changes. Key personnel, that was me. He hadn't fired me. He'd unbolted the thing keeping the ship anchored, and now they were drifting, with no one at the wheel who knew the tide. But I wasn't interested in watching them sink. I had work to do. And the thing about people who truly know what they're doing, they don't spend time shouting about it. They just build again, quietly, steadily, until the results speak for themselves. It was about 6 weeks after the first client walked that I got the call. Not from a board member this time, but from someone I hadn't expected. He used to manage strategy at the firm. We'd crossed paths a few times, worked through a particularly nasty product launch together a couple of years back. Quiet guy, sharp. Knew how to listen before speaking. Now, apparently, he was one of the last ones standing. They're asking questions, he said, the kind people only ask when they're realizing they should have asked earlier. I knew what he meant. Turnover was higher than expected. New initiatives were collapsing under their own weight. Processes had been changed, some on paper, some in practice, but nobody could explain why they weren't producing results. From the outside, it looked like a minor adjustment period. On the inside, it was structural decay, and that was the part the board was finally starting to feel. Not just in performance metrics, but in reputation. "You're becoming a bit of a legend," he added with a half laugh. "Not that you asked for it." I didn't respond to that. I wasn't interested in status. That's the thing some people never understand. I didn't build reliable systems to get applause. I built them because that's how you create trust. Because if a client has to double-check your every move, you've already lost them. But now, apparently, they wanted to talk again. "Not with him in the room," I said. "If they're serious, they know where to find me." He understood, hung up without pushing. I didn't hear anything for another 2 weeks. Then, a quiet email. Direct, from someone at the top. No small talk, no attempts at justification. It read, We made decisions based on an incomplete understanding of how vital certain people were to both operations and client confidence. We're interested in discussing what a new structure could look like. With you. I didn't answer it, not out of spite, but because by then I'd already built something better. 6 clients, all of whom had been with the firm for years, were now working with me directly. No friction, no bureaucracy, no weekly shuffle of managers with shiny job titles, and no clue what the clients actually cared about. Just results. Quiet, steady, consistent results. I'd hired 2 people. Carefully. People I'd worked with before. People who understood that precision matters more than speed, and that listening is more powerful than posturing. We weren't building a brand. We were just solving problems, ones we knew how to fix because we'd fixed them before. But the real shift happened when I got invited to a private industry roundtable. I wasn't on the original list, but a client pushed for it. Said the conversation wouldn't be complete without someone who actually understood implementation, not just vision. I showed up quietly, no logo on my name card, just my name, Neil Carson. And as I listened to executives from major firms toss around phrases like agile recalibration and synergistic realignment, I realized something. I didn't miss any of it. Not the boardroom theater, not the performative strategy sessions, not the jargon that was designed to sound intelligent, but never meant to say anything real. What I missed, what I was finally getting again, was the work, the clarity, the relationships where no one had to pretend. That evening, I got a message from one of the junior developers I used to mentor. "You were right," he wrote. "They're drowning in meetings, and no one knows where the lifeboats are." I told him to keep his head down, do good work, and reach out when the time is right. Because that's the other thing I'd learned. You can't save a ship that doesn't want to be saved, but you can be ready when the crew starts jumping. 3 months after I was fired, the company posted a quarterly update. Decline in client retention. Missed targets. A vague paragraph about executive transitions. He was gone. Quietly removed, no announcement. Just a name wiped from the website. I never felt satisfaction in his failure. What I felt was validation. Not because I'd won anything, but because the truth had caught up. You don't have to fight every injustice. Sometimes the consequences right themselves. And in the end, I didn't need to go back. They'd already taught me what I needed to know, that sometimes being removed from a place that no longer recognizes your value is the most direct path to doing your best work. My new firm, small, precise, and trusted, wasn't flashy. We didn't advertise. We didn't need to. Our work spoke for itself. The trouble he unleashed on his first day? It wasn't me. It was underestimating the cost of competence, and by the time they realized what they'd lost, we were already too far ahead to look back.